This is James Taylor. And so today I'm going to be talking to y'all about the conservation issue of conserving biodiversity while also providing for the world. So we're going to kind of talk about this in the context of grasslands and grassland birds. So grassland bird populations have decreased by 53% since 1970. Based on the info from the Grassland Bird Trust, that means that 720 million grassland birds have been lost since 1970. And so they kind of categorize it down and say that out of 4 eastern meadowlarks have been lost since 1970. So it's a really big issue that's kind of been happening for 55 years at this point, almost 56, but I don't feel like it's really talked about a whole lot. And so the paper that I read was called Optimizing Conservation in Species-Specific Agricultural Landscapes. The authors were John M. Yiser et al. And so they went into kind of a deep dive into 3 study species, eastern meadowlark, field sparrow, and northern bobwhite quail. And their study area was in the Green River Basin in south central Kentucky between 2010 and 2015. And the areas that they were looking at and doing this research were part of the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP, in Kentucky. That's kind of a federal program that I don't know if it still is in existence, but it's kind of like CSP, where you're doing active agriculture management or agriculture practices on your property, and you're trying to conserve a part of it for native species, native grassland birds, etc. And so they did point count surveys. They went in and looked at how the management was being done for these little CRP sections, what they'd be managing the property for, and then also looking at the amount of birds that are on the property, the kind of patch that was there, the part or adjacent the patches were, and the quality or density of the habitat that was there. And so kind of the key takeaways from this paper was that recovery of grassland birds in an agriculture landscape is actually really difficult. You have a monoculture that exists everywhere, and it might be slightly different on different properties, but you can't really conserve biodiversity on a large scale at a population scale that actually functions really, really well. They also found that different conservation programs have different outcomes. So the CREP really focused on quail, but not the other 2. And so the thought was that these similar species that use similar habitat would all benefit, but that's not necessarily the case. And so they said that using different conservation programs for specific species would actually be more beneficial. And then they talk about that agriculture is one of the biggest factors of loss of grassland species kind of worldwide. And like I just said, they found that similar species respond differently to the same management practices. So you can't just do quail habitat and expect an eastern meadowlark to actually have successful nesting or brooding or breeding habitat. And then they also found that patch adjacencies and densities have different effects on different species. It seems that eastern meadowlarks, the further patches are from each other, the less likely they are to have a positive impact. And then for the sparrows and for the quail, it kind of didn't really matter. They could use patches that weren't as close to each other, and the densities didn't really matter. Quality obviously is important, but more over a bigger area seems to be the best for those 2. And so they also said that in the end, that a hybrid approach to management is better than single species focus. Don't do an umbrella effect. You've got to focus on these individual species on certain properties or certain aspects of your property. And so going forward, what does this mean? So we've got to find a balance between land change and land conservation that meets our idea of conserving biodiversity by also providing for the world. And then we've got to do housing developments, which pop up everywhere, urbanization in general, and then back agriculture production in different and better ways that kind of focus on biodiversity and don't hinder it. And then management needs to be done for specific species. You can't do an umbrella effect and hope that it helps. And so the image that I got was from Grassland Bird Trust, and I really found this interesting. I think it's a topic that we don't really know a whole lot about, even though we should, especially here in the Southeast. And so I encourage everybody to kind of look into it a little bit more. I found it really fascinating. And obviously, like grasslands and grassland birds are kind of a cool thing to me, but I really hope that y'all look into seeing the different ways and different aspects of like conserving our biodiversity while also providing for the world. So thanks, y'all.